If you're tuning in right now, stick with me for the next minute, because what you're about to hear isn't recycled prepper talk or another list of myths dressed up as history. These are field-tested survival methods pulled straight from real World War II farm life, where every harvest, every tool, every scrap of energy meant the difference between making it and going without. And before we dive in, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our deep dives into the survival wisdom our grandparents actually used. Serious historians know wartime farms were some of the most efficient systems ever built, not because they wanted to be, but because they couldn't afford not to be. How wartime farmers mastered soil health without modern fertilizers. During World War II, fertilizers were rationed, so farmers had to rebuild soil naturally. They turned to composting systems that were layered with precision: kitchen scraps, animal bedding, ash from wood stoves, and chopped weeds. The key wasn't the ingredients, but the consistency. They used thin layers, not thick dumps, which kept heat even and decomposition active year-round. You can apply the same principle today by building compost in alternating layers no thicker than a hand's width. In a month, you'll notice your pile heating more evenly, and by the second turning, it'll break down much faster. That's the same technique that kept wartime victory gardens producing in exhausted soil. Why they relied on perennial food sources instead of chasing seasonal crops. A wartime farmer never trusted a single harvest. They planted perennials: Jerusalem artichokes, rhubarb, asparagus, berry canes, because these crops survived droughts, pests, and neglect far better than annuals. A family could disappear into factory shifts or civil defence work and still come home to living food waiting in the ground. If you want to harden your own food system, start with one perennial bed. Set it up once, mulch it deeply, and you'll have calories coming back every year with almost no input. That's how World War II households stayed fed even when labour was being pulled away to the war effort. How they stored food with zero electricity and almost no equipment. Cold storage was scarce, so people built clamp mounds. Shallow pits lined with straw, topped with root vegetables, covered again with straw and soil. Done right, carrots, beets and potatoes lasted through the entire winter. You can build one in a modern backyard by digging a shallow trench, laying down a breathable base layer, stacking produce without washing it, and capping it. The key is drainage. Wartime farmers always built clamps on slight slopes. That natural refrigeration worked well enough to support entire communities before rural electrification. The forgotten craft of repairing tools instead of replacing them. Metal was being diverted to the war, so farmers kept their tools alive far longer than any modern consumer would expect. Handles were replaced with whatever hardwood was available, blades were hammered straight, and edges were restored with files rather than grinders. The lesson here isn't nostalgia, it's capability. If you haven't replaced a tool handle yourself, try it once. Pick an old hoe or shovel, shape a new handle with a rasp or knife, wedge it tightly and oil it. You'll understand immediately how wartime farmers stretched resources for years under strict rationing. How they built water resilience using gravity-fed systems. With fuel shortages, electric pumps were unreliable. The solution was simple gravity. Rain barrels were placed above garden level, sometimes stacked on stone or brick platforms, and water was delivered through hoses or simple channels. These systems required no energy and worked in blackout conditions. You can replicate this by elevating a food-grade barrel on cinder blocks and running a hose downhill. During the war, this setup could irrigate a sizable plot without anyone touching a pump. Their method for pest control, using biology, not chemicals. Sprays were hard to come by, so farmers leaned into natural predation. They encouraged birds by hanging seed bundles through the winter, kept ducks around cabbage patches, and released ladybugs collected from hedgerows. They also practiced one of the most overlooked tricks today: ash dusting. Wood ash, sifted and sprinkled on plant leaves, deterred soft-bodied pests while adding potassium to the soil. It's simple. Take cold, fine ash from a fireplace, sift it through your fingers, and dust the base of plants in the morning dew. Wartime farms relied on this because it worked consistently. Their approach to energy efficiency through chore stacking was, well, really something to behold. Every task in WWII farm life was done with purpose, you see. If someone fed livestock, they also checked fences, collected fallen branches for fuel, and spot-weeded paths. They called it doing the round. Today, you can adopt this habit by linking 3 tasks every time you step outside: maintenance, collection, and inspection. Over a month, the difference is dramatic, and it mirrors the efficiency that allowed wartime farms to operate with minimal manpower. Now, let's talk about how they created seed security by saving varieties adapted to their land. Seed catalogues weren't arriving reliably during the war, so farmers saved their own year after year. That repetition created hyperlocal varieties perfectly suited to their soil and climate. You can begin the same process by selecting the healthiest plant in your garden each season and saving its seeds. After a few years, you'll notice those seeds outperform store-bought ones because they're essentially evolving to match your land. Why were community networks the real force multiplier of WWII farming? Well, one farm never stood alone. If a plough broke, neighbours showed up. If someone had excess eggs, they swapped them for flour or preserved goods. It wasn't charity. It was mutual assurance. In modern prepping, people talk a lot about independence, but ignore interdependence. Start small trade, extra produce with a neighbour, teach a skill, or share a surplus you'd otherwise waste. That's the same model that kept wartime rural families afloat during the hardest years of the century. If this deep dive into WWII farm resilience gave you something valuable, make sure you subscribe, share the video with fellow history lovers, and help keep this legacy of survival alive.